Glenn. Hi. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about why I got into this. In 2014, we had the opportunity to get a Keep Georgia Beautiful grant for community orchards. And part of that grant was we had $2,000 with which we could buy plants, um, do the infrastructure, the water stuff, whatever. But we also had to have a 3-year plan of maintenance, and I decided that the money that we got should go into buying the plants and not into maintaining things. So we actually went with kind of a unique approach. I've been teaching about native biodiversity and trying to restore biodiversity to our rapidly developing community for a long time. So we put in native fruit and nut plants, and that's how I got into uh, edible landscaping. Part of the demonstration purpose of the orchard, the community orchard, was to show people how they can use native plants as edible landscaping in their own yards. They are ideally suited. They're smaller plants, so they're good for small homeowner lots. You don't need multiples of them for most of them to get fruit out of them. And they have lots of good aesthetic properties as well. So those are some of the reasons that we want to plant edibles. We want to have those aesthetics, the flowers that come out in spring. Some of them will flower in the fall. They have beautiful fall color, just like our landscape trees. They provide seasonal interest from all seasons. And of course, they provide food. The perennials that we plant are going to be a reliable output of food with a lot less maintenance than those annual vegetable gardens require that have to be planted every year, that have to be maintained throughout the growing season. If you plant in use your yard for landscaping and edibles, then you have more control over what inputs go into those plants. So you know what you're eating. You can harvest them when that fruit is ready and not when the processor decides it's time to ship it. Uh, a lot of times it will taste better. And you will also have the benefit of, there are other things that like to eat that fruit as well. So the wildlife, your trees, your flowering trees and fruiting trees are going to attract birds, butterflies, other pollinators, and a lot of the native wildlife as well um, is used to eating stuff like that. So your edible perennials, your edible garden plants can be trees or shrubs or vines, native plants, and they can bear fruits, nuts, berries, or herbs. When we're looking at doing edible landscaping, we need to keep in mind those typical landscape design principles because aesthetics are going to be very important in your yard, just as, especially if you have a homeowners association, one of the ways that we can get away with having the edible landscaping is to make it look like it is just as pretty as the ornamental landscaping. So we want to keep the plant form, the colors, and the purpose in mind. With edible landscaping plants, we're going to select plants that are going to have a dual purpose function. So they're going to be aesthetic. They're going to have that landscape contribution, but they're also going to be producing food. So they can be used as focal points, as borders around beds, as hedges, hedgerows, or living screens to help keep our neighbors from peeking into our yard. And they can also be used as shade plants. Over here on the right, we've got black and blue salvia, it can be used culinarily, but the flavor might be too strong for cooking. The flowers make a nice garnish in drinks or ice cream or salads or such. But the salvias are real important for attracting our pollinators. So we're going to be feeding other things, other critters, not just ourselves. We need to have the pollinators in there to help us make those fruit trees, those vegetable plants, or whatever we're growing productive. So some tree examples that we can use in the Piedmont are There are some trees that are good for edible landscaping and some that you should just skip. The apple trees, the fig trees, the pear trees, and some of these native trees are really good. But the peach trees have way too many pests and pathogens. You cannot sustainably grow them without having to treat them every week or two to keep some kind of pests off of them. Lots of things want to eat those as well. And that's the same for the other stone fruits as well, the plums, the nectarines, and the cherries. I would not recommend growing those. There's also pecan trees that they are very large, and you need at least two different varieties to make them productive. Three is better. And when they grow to 80 feet tall, that's going to be having three of those in your landscape might be too much for some of the sizes of our residential lots. Now, one of the things that you can do, of course, is buy two and give one to a neighbor, and then you have those trees in proximity for cross-pollination. This is going to be for the apple trees need cross-pollination as well. The pear trees will do better if you have two different varieties. Some of them are self-fertile, but they'll do better if you have two different varieties. The pecan trees also need a whole lot of water, and they can be alternate bearing. And keep in mind that our trees are going to be slow food. It's unlike an annual vegetable garden where you're going to get something to eat that season. You might not get fruit off of trees for a year, 2, 3, 7, depending on what kind of cultivar it is or what kind of tree it is, and how old it is when you actually plant it. We could do shrubs and brambles. Those are going to produce fruit more quickly than the trees will. And we can also use lots of native shrubs. Blueberries are native, of course. People are very familiar with that. But some of our other natives that we'll talk about a little bit later are Chickasaw plums, gooseberries and currants, and Jacob and chestnuts. Many of our native fruit and nut trees are small. They're considered large shrubs or small trees, and they're multi-stemmed. So they can be substituted for other kinds of trees in your landscape. They're structurally similar to, say, a crepe myrtle that has multi-stems. Plus, they produce edible food. There are some vines that can be incorporated into edible landscaping. Muscadines are a native one. Bunch grapes are a little bit harder to do. Blackberries and raspberries they're not vines, they're brambles, so they're kind of in between a bush and a vine. But they can be trained along trellises to give that kind of vine covering aesthetic. Kiwi is another one that can be used. There's actually a webinar coming out about kiwi production sometime this week. So we experimented with that at the Learning for Life Garden in Forsyth County for a few years, and they grew. Here's a photo of them. They grew along the whatever that thing is called, pergola, for several years. So they lived, and the birds really enjoyed nesting in them. We never got any fruit off of the vines, and I think we had one hard winter where they did die back. They're cold hardy to about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And then they just don't make it. So we eventually did replace those with muscadines for that trellising system. And the muscadines did bear fruit. You can use edible landscaping as ground cover. Strawberries are an example. Creeping thyme, you've probably seen that growing between pavers. Oregano will spread. It's in the mint family, so you got to be careful where you put it. And creeping raspberry is another option. They produce tiny little berries in the fall. So on the left we have strawberries, an example of strawberries growing. And on the right, the lemon thyme is being used as a mini shrub or a border around a pond. Perennial herbs are a great choice for edible landscaping. Chives, hyssop, winter savory, and some other things can be used as borders or edge plants. Rosemary and lavender can be used as hedges. Don't you want hedges like this? Isn't that beautiful? time can fill in spaces between pavers or stones, and herbs can be a garden all on their own. Some of the easier things to get started with include rabbit eye blueberries, figs, thornless blackberries, heritage raspberry. Both of these grow erect, so you don't need a trellising system for the thornless blackberries or the heritage raspberry. However, heritage raspberry is typically considered a North Georgia, a North and Upper Piedmont or mountains region plant. So we'll talk about the dormant red for the Piedmont area. All of these are going to be vigorous in the right growing conditions, as long as they're in the environment that they need to be in to thrive, they are likely to thrive. Figs are not native, but they are very homeowner friendly. And herbs can be started indoors. They can be grown in pots. They can be tucked into corners of your yard. They are going to want, most of them are going to want full sun. A few will not. But perennial herbs are they're good wherever you can put them. So let's talk about each of these. The rabbit eye blueberries are native to Georgia. They are well adapted to our soil and climate, so they're going to have fewer pest and disease problems. The harvest is going to be over several weeks, so they don't ripen all at once. A few berries will ripen and you'll go pick them, and a few berries will ripen and you'll go pick them. So you're going to be picking daily, but at the outset, when they start producing, the yield will be small, but as the plants mature, the yield grows every time. They're full of antioxidants and they're healthy for you. UGA Extension researchers have been using selective breeding to make the blueberries more homeowner friendly. They have smaller size bushes. They have larger, sweeter berries and berries that resist fruit cracking, some that will harvest more easily than some of the older cultivars as well. They need very little pruning. They put on a lovely red fall color, and a lot of them will retain at least some of their foliage throughout the winter. You do need at least two varieties to get the fruit. So they come in early season. There are early season bloomers, mid-season bloomers, and late season cultivars. Up here in the Upper Piedmont and the foothills of the mountains, I do not recommend people plant the early varieties because a late frost will just take all the blooms off and you won't get anything off of them. So you can go across the seasons as long as you have select things that are blooming at the same time. So if you're going to go early, you want to have at least two early bloomers, but then you can put a mid bloomer in there. And as long as they are crossing their flowers on them at the same time, then you will get some cross pollination for those. The same for the mid and late. So if you plant correctly, you can have a very long season of blueberries. You can be harvesting from late May through late June for a long time. So the recommendation for a family, a typical family, is having 4 to 6 blueberry bushes. Design principles recommend planting in odd numbers. So 3, 5, 7. So think about how much your family is going to use blueberries, and you might want to plant 3 to 5 blueberries out there. Fig trees are very low maintenance. You do not need a lot of fertilizer. If you over fertilize them, you can mess up their production. They can be grown as a bush form or a tree form. They do need a lot of sun, but they also need protection from the cold. So it's recommended that you plant them on the south side of the house. They bear their flowers inside the fruit, so you won't really see them flowering. But all of the varieties that we sell in Georgia are self-fertile. They're all female flowered. They're self-fertile, so they don't need a pollinator. If you have, there is a California fig that is sometimes sold here that requires a wasp as a pollinator, and that wasp doesn't survive in Georgia. So don't get that kind. You won't ever get any fruit. You want to plant them on the south side. I don't know how cold it gets in Pike County. We can have, as a matter of fact, a few years, we've had lots of days that were below 30 degrees. So up here, the fig trees can die back to the ground in cold winters, but they do come back in the spring. They regenerate and start growing again in the spring. And that is one way that helps you keep them as that bush form, which is easier to harvest the fruits off of. The recommended varieties for the Piedmont are going to be the Celeste and the Cold Hardy or the Hardy Chicago, but brown turkeys are still very popular. A lot of people up here have told me that they have brown turkeys that grow just fine and produce well. So if you have a neighbor that has a fig tree that you know produces well, they're real easy to propagate. So you can get started with very little cost if you just convince them to let you take a cutting off of that. Best time to do that is going to be in late February before they start budding up. So that's one way to get started. Brooklyn, do we have any questions so far?
None so far. I did want to mention that we've had quite a few winters knocking figs back here in
Okay,
Pike County and surrounding areas. But this past year, it looks like we're going to have a jam up fig season. So we're
good.
already enjoying quite a few fresh figs, and they're coming on strong this year. So
Yeah,
y'all get
yeah,
out there and enjoy some figs.
yeah. Make some fig preserves. Muscadine grapes, these are of course native. They are excellent for the Piedmont area. They do need full sun in that typical vegetable bed kind of soil um, uh, condition. They are very vigorous growers. You've probably seen them growing wild in the woods. They can have a very heavy vine. So they are going to need a very sturdy trellis that has trellising to let the arms grow out 10 feet on each side of the trunk. So you'll need a trellis that spans 20 feet with very sturdy infrastructure. This is showing the photos here are showing the trunk planted in the middle of the two posts, but some growers recommend planting that trunk closer to the post just to give it more support. So that's yeah, like I said, they're going to put on a lot of vine, a lot of leaves, and a lot of grapes. These are native, but they again, breeders have been creating more refined cultivars that have thinner skins, sweeter flavor, um, more attractive to homeowners. What else? They are rich in resveratrol, an antioxidant that is good for your heart. Brambles, we've got thornless blackberries. There are a few, well, no, there are no thornless raspberries. Raspberries are always going to bite you when you harvest them, but there are some thornless blackberries, and a lot of these have an upright growth after the first year. The first year they are going to be trailing, but with pruning after that first year of growth, they will grow upright and not need the trellising system. They produce fruit on floricanes. So those are the second year canes. So you got to be mindful in your pruning to make sure that you leave that first year, don't prune out your first year cane because it's going to fruit the next year. This is not the same as the raspberries. The raspberries are going to produce on the primocanes. So those are the first year canes. So with raspberries, you can just mow them back and they'll come back up with the new canes and fruit again. With the brambles, they recommend 15 plants for a family of 4, but you don't need to plant 15 plants because they're very easy to propagate. They do it themselves. So I started with 2 thornless blackberries one year, and within 3 years I had 7. After that, I was digging them up and sharing them with neighbors. So they are going to spread. Make sure you got plenty of room for them. Um, there are some erect blackberries that have the thorns, but the Apache, Arapaho, Natchez, Navajo, and Wachita are the thornless cultivars, and they produce nice big berries. Sometimes you'll have some, if they get too much sun, some of the berries will turn white, but it doesn't affect their flavor or their quality. Heritage is an erect raspberry, but again, it's only recommended for the upper Piedmont. So for y'all's area, the dormant red is going to be the recommendation. It's adapted for growing in southern states. So it's kind of considered throughout the state, but it doesn't do well up here. So it's trailing, but it's ever bearing, and it's well adapted for the Piedmont and south of that. The brambles do need to be fertilized in April and June. And again, after that first year, the erect ones will be trailing the first year, so they'll be looping over to the ground. But when you prune them back, you'll prune them back about 3 feet off the ground, and then they will hold themselves up after that. So this is a photo of pineapple sage in late fall. And it will bloom throughout the summer and until the frost takes it. It's considered an annual, but this plant grew in my front yard for many, many years. It also freely seeded. So even after I dug it out, I had plenty of seedlings coming up and plenty of fragrant pineapple scented seedlings to share. So perennial herbs can get very large. This one was about 6 feet around and 6 feet tall when I finally dug it out and put in the blackberries. But so they're real important for our pollinators. The bees, the hummingbirds loved this thing. It's a great smell, and it was a stunning focal point within the garden that I had it in. So there are some things that are more work, but they might be worth doing. The apple and the pear trees, bunch grapes are going to be more difficult than muscadines, but depending on what you plan to use them for, or if you don't have a taste for muscadines, they're worth doing. And then strawberries, of course. In Georgia, because of our heat, sometimes when we plant apples, they don't color fully, but they still taste great. So these were McIntosh apples that were growing in my front yard for years. When they grow up in Michigan, they are fully red. When they grew here, they had a few red stripes. So they look a little different, but they still tasted great. Sorry for all the text on this one. But apples, you need two different varieties for that cross-pollination. Or if you have a neighbor with a crabapple tree, that also works as a pollinizer. So make sure that your two varieties bloom at the same time. Again, like the blueberries, there are early blooming, mid-season blooming, and late season blooming apples. I'm used to them being classified as A, B, and C, A being the early bloomers, C being the later bloomers. When you select your varieties, try to get two different ones in the A or the B or the C, or you can spread them out. I mean, you can have an A and a B as long as they're overlapping with that bloom. You will still get some pollination. You might not get as much fruiting as if you had them in the same season, but don't do an A and a C because they don't overlap at all. So you wouldn't get any cross-pollination on that. And there's a couple of varieties that are sterile, so they're not considered use. They will produce fruit, but they won't be a pollinizer for you. So stay away from those. Just take, if you look at the UGA Home Garden Apples publication, it gives you a list of varieties that are recommended for the different areas, the different regions of the state. You can get semi-dwarf varieties. Those will keep the fruit a little bit closer to the ground than the full-size trees. You can also do dwarf varieties, but you're going to have to support those dwarves throughout their life cycle because the root system on the dwarf rootstock is not strong enough to support the tree over its lifetime. So they'll need to be supported throughout their lifetime. Unlike blueberries, the apples are going to typically ripen all at once. So you're going to have a large harvest coming in all at once. You're going to prune them in late winter, late February to early March. That's going to stimulate their new growth and their blooming. And it's also going to help keep pest problems down. You want to make sure that your branches are not overladen with fruit. So keeping your fruit down, you want to do some hand thinning so that you don't get over much. Because if you overproduce in one year, if that tree overproduces in one year, you can break branches from the weight of the fruit, and it also might turn it into an alternate year producer. So you would have a heavy fruit production in one year, but then you'd have very little fruit production in the next year. So you want to try to moderate your amount of production to keep that tree healthy. Common problems with apple trees are going to be fire blight. That is a bacterial issue that is actually spread with your pollinator. So there's not a whole lot you can do with that. Pruning is the best way to manage that. The fire blight creates a very distinctive look. So the tip of the branch will kind of crook over like a shepherd's crook, and the leaves on that end will look like they've been scorched. So you're going to prune that out back at least 6 to 8 inches behind where you see the dieback. Always use sanitation when you're doing your pruning. Wipe those blades with alcohol or dip them in a bleach and water solution between every cut so that you're not spreading the disease as well. Sooty blotch and fly speck can be present on them, but these are surface, they're cosmetic. They don't affect the fruit quality. And then scab, leaf spots, and powdery mildew can also be problems. Excuse me. Pear trees are going to be, their cultivation is going to be very similar to the apple trees. Some of these are self-fertile, but you will get better production if you have the two varieties. The kefir is a very old kind of cultivar. Not necessarily going to have the best fruit. Some of it is kind of stony, hard spots in it. Orient is another that is self-fertile. They are early bloomers, so watch out for frosts. And you're going to begin pruning and shaping your apple trees, your fig trees, everything that you plant. You need to begin that shaping as soon as you plant it. You're going to train your apple trees to a single central leader to have them coming straight up with ladder-like branching going out. So think about a spiral staircase. You want your branches coming out around each side of it like it's going up. And you want to keep a lot of space between those branches too, so that you can get a lot of sunshine in there and keep fungal diseases down. Bunch grapes are less vigorous than the muscadines. So the trellis system doesn't have to be as broad or as sturdy to manage them. You're going to cut the length of that in half. So instead of 20 feet wide, it's going to be about 10 feet for the cordons to come out on the bunch grapes. In the Piedmont area, Pierce's disease, which is a major disease of grapes, might be a concern. That has to do with elevation and some other issues as well. So that might be a limiting factor on growing the bunch grapes. There are some resistant varieties, so look for that if you want to do bunch grapes. There are two different kinds of pruning. You're going to do a late winter pruning, which is what you see up in the top photo there, where you've pretty much brought it back to a skeleton. You've brought your vine back to a skeleton. And from there, you'll do in late winter. From there, you'll have new sprouts come out. Those are going to be your fruit-bearing sprouts. There's also a secondary that you do during the growing season where you remove some of the foliage to keep it off the ground for one thing, but also to give a little bit of more sunshine to the fruit coming in. American vines are going to be on this. They're going to cascade over a trellis. The French vines are going to go straight up. So different trellising system for those. Strawberries are perennial in North Georgia, and they spread very well from the runners. The mother plant will send out little shoots that will touch the ground and start rooting and create a new plant. So they can be used as a ground cover. They can be planted in the spring or in the fall. They need little fertilization after establishment. You're just going to fertilize them in March to keep them going. But if you're using them, I mean, sometimes edible landscaping, we're planting for other things. So if you're using them to hold a bank or a hill or something like that, you might not mess with them a whole lot because access would be a little bit difficult. But if you are planning on harvesting the berries, keep in mind that they are very moist fruit and they are touching the ground. They're in contact with the ground. So if you can keep that pine straw under them and keep them off the ground, that will help you manage some of the fungal issues that can happen. But all these other ground dwelling critters like slugs and foraging wildlife are also going to be very interested in the berries. Okay, we're going to talk about some native options because this is what I get really excited about. Reintroducing native biodiversity to our local ecosystems, I think is very important, especially in developed areas like we are here. The Allegheny chinkapin, the chinkapin chestnut, Castanea pumila, is a beautiful little tree. Its mature size is going to be less than 30 feet tall. It's multi-stemmed like that crepe myrtle. It's full sun. It will tolerate some partial shade, but any of your food-bearing plants, any of your fruit-bearing plants are going to produce better as long as they're getting full sun, with one exception, and that's the service berry, which does not do well in the full sun at all. So it's a great margin tree. They have catkin flowers that are pretty interesting, and they come up in the late spring. So there will be pollinators, little small pollinators buzzing around them all the time. The nuts are in a very sharp bristled burr. But the good news is that when the nut is ripe, when it ripens in late fall, the burr is going to open by itself. So you can just reach in and pluck it. It has beautiful golden fall foliage, so it's a great ornamental tree for small spaces. It's also great for wildlife. It is resistant to the chestnut blight, not entirely, but it has resistance. So it has actually been used in the chestnut breeding programs that are really close to, actually, I think you can purchase American chestnuts, again, seedlings now, because they've gotten so close to getting them disease resistant. Environmental adaptation. It'll tolerate a wide range of growing conditions. It likes a slightly acidic soil. It grows pretty quickly, but then it doesn't get real big. We don't have any significant pest or disease issues. And here's a photo of the little sweet fruit nut, or little sweet nut, that you can just reach in and pluck it right out of the burr without getting poked. Now, if you're going to roast these, they are small. So half the time in the oven as you would with a typical chestnut. Only roast them for half as long. They make a great scone too. Gooseberries and currants. Currants were the original raisin. So before we were drying grapes into raisins, currants were being used for baking and things like that. They're small bushes with arcing branches or canes. You can tell them apart because the gooseberries have thorns and the currants do not have thorns. They can grow in partial shade, but again, they're going to fruit better if they've got that full sun. They are going to bear on canes that are 2 to 3 years old. So your pruning on these is really going to be just removing the old canes, just cutting back the old canes every year or two so that you've got fresh canes coming out for continuous production. Part of the reason we don't see gooseberries and currants is that back in the 1930s, the WPA crews wiped them out during the Depression in an effort to stop the spread of white pine blister. The gooseberries and the currants can be they're a secondary host to a fungus that causes white pine blister. If you're familiar with the cedar apple rust, it's a two-host fungus. So the white pine blister is kind of like that. But what it turns out is that it's not as bad of a problem as people thought it was. So people are starting to plant these again. But if you're in certain areas like Virginia where white pine production is a significant industry, you actually have to get permission to be able to plant these guys. Pawpaw is one of my favorites. It comes close to being the perfect plant. It's a member of the custard apple family. It is the northernmost growing tropical plant, basically. The custard apple is a tropical plant, and this is the northern growth most growing, but it's throughout the eastern seaboard. It was spread by megafauna, like giant sloths and mammoths and things, because it has a really big seed in it, and it took a really big animal to be able to digest that or to eat that fruit and process that seed and then deposit it with some manure as it moved along. So that's how they spread throughout North America. Probably more when, but I can talk a lot about pawpaws. They're really cool. They grow to be 15 to 20 feet high, and they will grow. They're an understory tree, but they will grow in full sun, and they have a nice pyramid kind of shape when they do. They stay pretty low to the ground. They've got a large tropical leaf on them, and branches stay pretty low. Deer will not graze them. They're very cool. They prefer an acidic soil, zones 5 to 8. They'll grow in the full sun and do well. They'll produce well as well. They offer high food value to a number of different species. They are the only host plant for the zebra swallowtail butterfly because it's the only leaf that the larva will eat. The blooms form in early May. They kind of come out in fuzzy buds before the leaves come out. And then the fruit ripens from early September to the frost. The only drawback that pawpaws have is that they are not drought tolerant. So you've got to keep water on them. They're used for fresh eating, uh, cakes, bread, cookies, pie. So here's a photo of the fruit. It's kind of like a kiwi without the fuzz. The flower is this maroon colored thing that comes out real early. There's a photo of the swallowtail or the zebra swallowtail. They're not great on the coast. You do need at least two trees that are genetically different. They can't, now pawpaws can form colonies because they will sucker. And if you have a colony of pawpaws, you won't ever get any fruit because they're clones. They're genetically the same. So you do need two that are different genetics. They are dioecious. So you've got a male flowering plant and a female flowering plant. So you need two. But they've got a lot of good qualities. The serviceberry I mentioned is the one that does not do well in full sun. We planted these at our orchard twice and lost them both times. So, but they grow in the woods at some of our other gardens very well, and the birds absolutely love them. I still have not eaten a serviceberry berry. But they're supposed to taste like a cross between blueberries and cranberries. They are self-fertile, so you don't need to have two. And again, um, they can be used for shade. They've got a fairly good canopy spread. Um, they're good for margin plantings along the edges of your yard where you've got some shade cover coming in. That would be a good place to put them. They flower out in March with a whole bunch of small white flowers, and they're ready for harvest in June. Then they have that beautiful yellow to red color in the fall. They're multi-stemmed, a small tree. Again, you could substitute them for a crepe myrtle or something like that. So structurally, you've still got the aesthetics going, the expected forms in your landscape. They're good for fresh eating. The Native Americans would dry them and then mix them with chopped up meat and fat and make pemmican, which was an early form of energy bars. There's recipes for all of this stuff as well. So those, if you're interested, I can send Brooklyn some links for some of this stuff. And here's what the fruit looks like. They like kind of a moist soil, low drought tolerance like the pawpaws. They do have a few problems. Rust, powdery mildew, and tree borers can be issues with them. Um, they're very winter hardy, and yes, the birds do love the berries. So how do we plant trees and shrubs? You have probably, if you're in this homesteading thing, you have probably been through this as before. But when you're planting trees and shrubs, you want to plant them as deep as they are in the pot, but in a big, wide, shallow kind of basin. So you want to make a wide area around them so that the roots have a chance to grow outward and work their way into the native soil. If you've purchased it and it's root bound, you might need to spread those roots out to make sure that they are going in all directions instead of just circling around in your planting hole. Use the native soil. Do not improve the planting soil in a basin. Now, what kind of soil do y'all have down there? We have clay, so I could be talking to a whole different audience. Are you sandy soil down there?
It really just depends. We have
Okay.
probably half of the county that has very sandy soil, and then half of us that are blessed with rocks and clay.
Oh boy. Okay. So what you don't want to do is create a container. So if you put a lot of good sweet stuff into that planting hole, then the roots are going to just go around in that sweet stuff. You also create layers. So if you put a lot of improvements, a lot of planting soil or stuff, good stuff into that hole, you might create layers that have different moisture holding capacity. So you're going to have some rooting issues, some drying out issues with that. So just let them go back into the native soil so that they can spread. If you do have to put supports on your tree, make sure that you are removing them or loosening them as the tree grows so that you're not girdling them. And where to plant. So a site analysis is a critical step in any landscape process. Whether you're designing a new one or adding to a landscape, the site analysis will help you determine there are going to be a whole lot of different characteristics in different parts of your yard. Even if we're talking about a small area in our developed environments, we've got a lot of things going on. One of the things that we've got going on is you might have underground infrastructure. So before you do any digging, you're going to need to make sure that you're not digging into something critical like a gas line or a power line or a septic line. Very bad. So call 811. We'll have a slide on that as well. And look at where you're going to have different issues. Where is the wind blowing? We mentioned that the fig trees need that cold protection, so plant them on the south side. Where do you have a wind corridor? Where you have paving, concrete, you might have some heat feedback from that. So you could scorch plants from too much heat. The concrete is also going to leach lime into the soil, so that's going to change the soil pH. So think about those things that are out there. How are we doing on time?
Have about 15 minutes.
Okay, so if you get those plants in their preferred environment, they are going to be healthier, require less maintenance from you to keep them going. So, and you'll probably grow more than you can eat. So you can freeze berries. You can, apples, pears, figs need more stable preservation. So canning would be something that you could do with those. They're time and labor intensive. We had a peach tree for a little while, which is why I can frankly not recommend doing it. About half of the peaches, and I mean literally half the peach was suitable for preservation because of all the other stuff that would get into it. It does take a lot of time, especially if you have something that's harvested all at once. But we do have options for learning about canning. There may be some family and consumer sciences agents around you, Brooklyn, that give canning lessons. or you can purchase the So Easy to Preserve book or go to the National Home Food Preservation website to learn how to safely can your excess produce. And then you have lots of gifts to give away. All right, what questions do we have?
Thank you so much, Heather.